So if you are considering getting a heat pump, then over the next 35 to 40 minutes, we're going to talk about a lot of the things that you might want to consider before you start your installation. These are things that I've learned over the course of the process of not only having mine installed, but also living with it for the last 3 months. We're going to talk about the physical location of your heat pump. We're going to be talking about piping and your hot water tank. We're going to be talking about all things around insulation and whether or not you need an energy performance certificate. We're going to talk about electrical. How is this going to be physically hooked up to your incoming main supply? And then we'll finish up talking about radiators and other things you might want to consider before you start that installation. If that sounds like something you're interested in, grab a cup of coffee. Let's get into it. In this first video, we're going to focus on the location of your heat pump. Now, this is really important because the surveyor will come in, they will make some recommendations, but you're the one that's going to be living with this for the next 20-something years, and it's not something you can easily move once it's been installed. So getting the location right is key. Let's start with the physical location and the dimensions of the space you're going to need to put your heat pump. Now, this is a Daikin 6 kilowatt unit. It is what I would say on the smaller side compared to some of the 9s and 14s that are out there. It is also wider than if you're installing a Cozy 6. So the unit itself is 122 centimeters, so 1200 millimeters wide. It is also 40 centimeters or 400 millimeters deep. Now, that's just the unit itself. It stands on blocks, but off the floor, it needs about 95 centimeters or 950 millimeters. That's just the physical unit. The unit itself needs to be set away from the wall. This particular unit is set 30 centimeters or 300 millimeters from the back wall, and the unit needs at least 1 meter of clearance in front of the fan. You may want to give it a lot more space than this. I currently have this 150 centimeters or 1.5 meters from my fence, and that gives it sufficient airflow for the cold air to move away in front of the unit. If you do not have sufficient space, what can happen is the cold air can cycle back to the condenser and you can get it into a loop where it's not running efficiently. Now let's talk about space at either side. The specifications say you need at least 50 centimeters or 500 millimeters on either side of the unit. So as you can see, you need to plan a space within your garden or at the front of your house that is going to give you enough space for the heat pump to operate efficiently. Now, something else for you to consider. The temperature of the air coming out of here is always going to be colder than the ambient air temperature. And on really cold days, like you can see in this video that I shot a few weeks ago, the temperature of the air coming out of here can be below -10, -12 degrees. If you have plants, especially plants that you're very fond of, growing in front of this, you will give them a very, very cold winter and probably kill them off. So think about where this air is going to go when it comes out. In my case, the air comes out here, the prevailing wind blows through and takes the cold air in that direction. There are no plants here that we're going to freeze, so that means it's not a problem for the cold air to be coming out the front of the unit. This here is where the air gets drawn into your system. This radiator takes the heat from the air into the heat pump. This will ice up on cold days. You will see a frost build up across this unit. Now, the system is designed to handle that. If it gets too much ice, it will defrost itself, and it happens very quickly in a few seconds, but it will pump warm water through this to get rid of the ice. Water will drip off this. There will be quite a lot of condensation, and on really cold days, there can be quite a lot of water. This is why you have a soakaway built underneath the unit. But on the coldest of cold days, this soakaway might not be enough. In fact, we had a day last week where the ground around here had frozen water on it because the soakaway couldn't soak the water away quick enough. If you're going to plan to put this near a doorway where people are going to be coming in and out, be conscious of the radiator on the side closest to the door. If the door is here, there could be a pool of ice building up around your heat pump. Now, this happens very rarely, but it does happen. If you're going to be getting a Cozy 6, your heat pump is going to be running on something called R290. R290 is a variant of propane gas, something you would use to cook on. there is a very small amount of that gas inside an R290 heat pump. If you're getting an R290 heat pump, you will not be allowed to place it underneath a window or next to an air brake. The reason is that the gas is denser than air, so if it were to leak, it would come out and potentially go underneath the house. An R290, being a propane variant, is explosive. Now, you don't need to really worry about this. There is so little actual gas inside the system, it's not really an issue. But because it is potentially an explosive gas, they will not allow you to site an R290 heat pump underneath a window or next to an air brake. Now, if you're getting a Daikin or one of the other manufacturers, the likelihood is you're going to be running on R32. R32 is not explosive, so therefore there are no problems siting it underneath a window or next to an air brake. Now, the next thing to consider is noise. You can hear that the heat pump is now running. This is about as noisy as it gets. If you would like a more in-depth look at noise, then take a look at the video. I'm going to pop a link up above, and I did a whole video on how much noise this thing makes from different areas, so you can see exactly how much noise a heat pump is likely to make. But if you are in a terraced house, you're right close to your neighbours, then you need to be aware of the noise that it's going to make and if it will be distracting or unpleasant for them. Now, I'd highly recommend you go and talk to your neighbours before you get a heat pump installed. Get them on side, show them the video that I made about how much noise it makes. Put to bed any fears that they might have that this is going to keep them awake. Also explain that it's going to take 4 or 5 days to install. There's probably going to be multiple contractors on site, and there may be some disturbance in the street outside. When it's all done and dusted, maybe invite them round to take a look at your heat pump. Now, something else to consider is, where are the electrical cables going to go? This heat pump is on the complete opposite side of my house to where the electrical supply comes in. So we actually have an electrical cable that goes up the other side of the house, through the attic and down to this consumer unit. Inside here, we have breakers for the heat pump itself. For what's called the D2 pump, this is an emergency pump. If there's a problem upstairs and we need to vent the cylinder, then the controller for that is in here as well. And we've also installed a Shelly energy monitor. This allows me to accurately record how much power the heat pump is using. Now, I should point out, the Shelly energy monitor does not come with the heat pump as standard. It's something you would need to purchase separately. They're about £100, but you do need to have them installed by a qualified electrician. They go into the box here alongside the breakers, and they will give you really accurate measurements of how much energy your heat pump is using. Now, one last thing to consider is pets. Now, not all pets have such a big furry coat here as Yogi. The air coming out of here is very, very cold. And so it may be worth thinking about, how do you screen this off from your pets? They will get a big shock if they don't have a big thick fur coat and they walk past something that's blowing out minus 20-degree air. Now, your heat pump is going to need somewhere to store hot water. That is going to be in a cylinder like this. Now, if you're a combi boiler owner, you don't have one of these today, or you don't have any way to store large amounts of hot water. So you're going to need to find a space in your house, or possibly in a garage, where a cylinder that size or even larger can go. Now, we had an old cylinder in here, I'll pop a picture up on the screen now, that took up about half this space. And it actually had a couple of shelves above it. You can see the wooden battens behind. Those are what the shelves rested on. And this is where we stored all of our spare blankets, spare bedding, and it kept it nice and warm because the old tank wasn't particularly well insulated. These new tanks are incredibly well insulated. There is no heat escaping in here. But as you can see, there is also no space really to store bedding. For those of you with a condensing boiler, hopefully the new tank will fit into the space where your old one went, therefore you won't have to make any more space within your house. For combi boiler owners, you are going to have to find some space in your house. Now, as a last resort, you can put the tank in the attic, but that will require a structural survey to make sure that the weight of the tank can be taken in your attic, which may add a little bit to your cost. For oil boiler owners, you're probably going to have a tank something like this in your house to store hot water in. Again, it'll probably be a 1-for-1 replacement. Now, one of the things you should talk about with your installer is the size of tank that they're going to fit. We were restricted because of the narrow size of this cupboard, meant we had to have a taller tank to be able to get the volume of water that we needed. But as part of the calculations they will do, they will want to understand how many baths and showers each person in the house might have in a 24-hour period so that they can size the tank appropriately. This particular tank here is 162 litres. It is more than enough hot water for multiple members of the family to have a shower in the morning and in the evening if they want. We don't actually have baths in this house. We've replaced our bath with a walk-in shower, so we don't actually use that much water. Now, let's talk about the route for the pipe work, because the pipes from this have to get to the heat pump outside. And as you can see, they go up into the ceiling. We'll go up into the attic now and we'll take a look at where they go. Okay, we're up in the attic. As you can see, there is quite a lot of pipe work up here. But basically the cupboard where the cylinder is approximately here. The pipes come up through the ceiling into this space. Now this large wooden platform that you can see at the back here, this is where the old water tank used to sit. And as part of the move away from the old boiler to the heat pump, we no longer needed that water tank or the header tank for the heating that used to live up here. So that's all gone, and the pipe work that you can see there that goes up through that shut-off valve across to the corner over there, that is the pipe that goes outside. As you can see, all the pipes are well insulated. That makes sure that the heat stays in the water, not heating my attic. Now the tank you can see on the back wall there is called a volumizer. This gives the system more volume, so more hot water in the system. It makes the heating more efficient, but it also helps with the defrost cycle. So when we need to get rid of all that ice that is built up on the condenser, we can take water from there and flush it back through the system to get rid of that ice. Now you will end up with more space in your attic, especially if you have a water tank or a header tank up here, but don't assume you're going to get all that space back because this pipe work needs somewhere to live. Now what we're going to do is we're going to head outside and I'm going to show you where these pipes come out and how they get back to the heat pump. So as you can see, we have a nice straight run down the wall all the way down into the back of the heat pump. This is worth spending some time on with your surveyor, because I've seen installations where these pipes zigzag all over the wall or even wrap around the building, and it looks really ugly. With some clever planning and positioning of the heat pump itself, they can make the pipe run dead straight up the side of the house and into the attic. Now, depending on the construction of your house, you may be able to take the pipes inside the house at an earlier opportunity. But we don't have that ability. We had to go up and into the void, into the attic, across the attic, and then down into the cylinder. But this depends on where your cylinder is located. The ideal installation is to have the shortest possible run of these pipes that you can, because although they're very well insulated, they will leak some heat. As you can see in this shot from my thermal camera, these do radiate a bit more heat than the background. Now the loss is minimal because these are really well lagged, but the shorter the run you can get, the better efficiency you're going to get out of your system. Now one last thing to consider. This tank is pressurized. We have a pressure gauge down here and it's currently at about 1.5 bar. That means your hot water is going to be coming out under pressure. That means if you do suffer from low hot water pressure today, you're going to get a nice surprise. Your hot water pressure is going to improve dramatically with a pressurized cylinder. And just to illustrate that fact, this is my cold water pressure. This is my hot water pressure. As you can see, plenty of hot water coming out really fast, and this is because the tank is under pressure. Now, if you're getting a heat pump installed in the UK, we have something called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme. This is a government grant of up to £7,500 to replace an existing gas boiler with a heat pump. But there are a few things you need to do before you apply to make sure that you're going to get that grant. And the most important one is to have a valid EPC. Now, we'll come on to what an EPC is in a moment. But the first thing you should consider before investing in any kind of technology like this is your house sufficiently insulated? Now the EPC will cover that, but the first thing you should consider is get up in your attic and have a look at what your insulation situation is. I guarantee you whatever is up there, you can always add to it, and it will be the cheapest thing you can do to save energy. Head down to B&Q, buy a few rolls of insulation. There are multiple different types. To be honest, any of them is better than nothing. So get some insulation, roll it out, cover over the existing insulation. You don't have to take the old insulation out, fit the new insulation across the top, and it will give you an immediate improvement. Now, let's talk about EPCs. EPCs are energy performance certificates. These are things that are required by the government if you're buying and selling houses. They're very similar to the certificates that you see on the side of electrical appliances, where they show the sort of A to G rating of how much energy that appliance is going to use. Well, an EPC is the same thing, but for your house. So first of all, how do you find out if you've got an EPC? Well, there's a really simple to use government website. You can head over to the link that I'm putting on the screen. I'll also place it in the description below. When you get there, press the Start Now button and enter your postcode. Now I'm going to put my postcode in, but I'm going to fog it out, and I'm also going to fog out all my neighbours' addresses just for privacy reasons. But as I scroll down here, I can find my house. Now you can see my house has a valid EPC because I needed it to get my heat pump installed. But if I click into it, what you can see here is we have an A rating, which is the best rating you can get, because our surveyor went through our house with a fine-tooth comb and looked at all of the different things that we could do that we've already done and make some recommendations of how we can make our house more energy efficient. Now, as I say, this is a requirement if you're buying and selling a house. So if you bought your house a long time ago, like we did nearly 30 years ago, it wouldn't have had an EPC. So for older houses, you will need to get a surveyor to come in and do this. If you just Google for EPC auditors or EPC surveyors in your region, you will find one pretty easily. You shouldn't pay more than about 70 to 90 pounds, depending on where you live, for an inspection and certificate to be issued. Now, here's the important thing, and this is why we talked about insulation a moment ago. In your EPC certificate, if you're applying for the bus grant, it must not say requires improved insulation or anything about adding insulation to your house. So make sure you talk to the person that's doing the inspection to make sure that they don't write something like that into your EPC certificate. Once you've got all your insulation sorted, the best thing you can possibly do is invest in something like this. This is a thermal camera. Now, there are multiple models out there on the market. This particular one is by a company called HIC Micro. It's called the B10. It is an appliance in that it has the screen and everything all built in, which means you don't need anything extra. You literally just take this with you and you can see the heat loss from your house. Now, there are other models. There are a company called Top Don. There are others where you can attach it to the bottom of your phone. So if you don't want an appliance like this, you want something that plugs into your phone, then there are models that do that. The only real difference between the two is this doesn't record what you're seeing, so you just see it on the screen, whereas the ones that plug into your phone do allow you to take a recording if you need that. Now, I've never needed to take a recording, so this one for me is perfect. It's idiot proof. Now, you shouldn't pay more than about 200 to 250 pounds for one of these. Beyond that, you're probably getting into professional devices, and to be honest, I'm not sure that the value is there if all you're doing is checking for heat loss in your house. Now, the best time to do a heat loss check is when it's really cold outside. So we're not going to do it right now when the sun is shining. We're going to wait till tonight when it's nice and dark and the temperature is around 0, and we're going to go around the house. You don't have to wait that long, so okay, as you can see, it's now night time. We're going to take our thermal camera and we're going to go for a walk around the house. We're going to check all the windows, the doors, to make sure that we're not losing any heat. Now, as a first test, we're just going to take a temperature reading at the front of the heat pump. It's just below freezing, the air that's coming out there. And again, if we lift our camera, you can see there the pipes that are going up to the hot water tank are glowing because they are full of hot water. Okay, let's head around to the front of the house. So as you can see there, you can see my heat reflection in the window. But if we look at the window frame as a whole, what you'll notice is along the top of the windows there is a little bit of heat escaping that's a little bit warmer than the surrounding parts of the window. That's where the air vent is that just allows a little bit of air to get in and out of the house. But we might need to see about blocking that up. Now, if we take a look at the front door, again, you can see the heat coming out through the glass. Now, we could put a solid door in there and block that up, but we're not actually losing a huge amount of heat. One place that is always worth checking is right down here at the bottom of the door, because that's where your draft excluder would be. So it doesn't look too bad. We might want to just look at the draft excluder, maybe put a new one on, because there is a bit of heat getting out there. As we come around to the side of the house, you can see here, this is the downstairs toilet window. We do have a little bit of heat leaking out along the top edge of the window. Might be worth checking the silicone sealant in the light tomorrow, just to make sure that we're not losing any unnecessary heat out of there. So now I'm upstairs in the house. What we'll do is we'll take our thermal camera and we'll take a look at the ceiling. And you can see we have a couple of cold spots right next to the loft hatch. So we may look at insulating a little bit better around there, just to make sure that we're not losing any heat up into the loft. Now, if we take a look in our ensuite bathroom, you can see right in the corner there, we do have a cold spot. This is obviously the external corner of the house. So again, I'm not sure how we could improve the insulation there, short of remodeling the bathroom, taking the plasterboard off and putting some insulation behind it. One thing I do find interesting is you'll notice this spotty pattern. This is the dot and dab that is behind the plasterboard. So obviously the plasterboard is held off the wall in certain places, but where there is some adhesive, it is letting a little bit of cold through. Now again, worth checking the ceilings, and you'll notice again that cold spot there, that I can do something about. I'll actually head up into the attic in the next couple of days and just put a bit more insulation in that corner. So you get the idea. Taking a thermal camera, going around and checking all of the seals on all of your windows and doors, checking your ceilings to make sure that you're not losing heat up into your attic. All of that, if you get that all done before you have your heat pump installed, it'll make your house really nice and toasty warm once it's up and running. Now, before we dive in and start talking about the electrics, let me make something very clear. I am not a qualified electrician. Whereas I am comfortable with the electrics in my house, I understand how they all work, I do get qualified electricians to come in and do the work for me. The reason for this is that your insurance company, if you make changes specifically in your consumer units and there is a problem, a fire, your insurance company may not pay out. So be very careful when you're doing electrics. Even if you are completely competent, you know what you're doing, always have a qualified electrician check your work. Now, when your surveyor comes, they're going to make some simple assumptions. They're going to ask to see where your consumer unit is. They're going to ask, obviously, where the heat pump's going to go, and then they will make a plan for the electrician. The electrician may come on site before that just to verify where everything's going to go. And this is why you want to make some decisions yourself before that happens, so you can make sure it's installed the way that you want it. Now, the first thing you're going to need is a spare way in your consumer unit. So let's head into the house and we'll take a look at the consumer unit. So as you can see, we've got a number of spare ways within the consumer unit. It could have been very easy to install the cable directly into that consumer unit and put a breaker in there for it. But we didn't do that. Now, the reason we didn't do that is because of this box here. This box here is our SolarEdge backup interface. This allows us to continue to operate the house when the grid goes down. So the batteries and the solar panels, if it's a nice day, can continue to supply energy to the house even though the grid has been disconnected. Because we have this installed, we wanted to make sure that when the house was in off-grid mode, that the heat pump was not continuing to run. Our thinking was, if the power was off for a couple of hours, we'd rather have the lights and all the facilities in the house on and not have the heat pump drain the batteries. If it was very cold, we could always plug in a small heater. Because of that, we installed a separate consumer unit. So in here is a small Proteus board. You can see that we have a breaker, a surge protection device, and then the main switch for the heat pump. Now, the way that this has been organised, and this will be very different for everybody else, is in our box here, we have a Henley block, which is basically a way to split the cable. So they come out the meter, they go into the Henley block, some of them then go off into the house, and then they come into this unit here through this cable you can see alongside. And then from here, they continue round, they go up the side of the house into the attic, cross the attic space, and then down the other side back to the heat pump. Now, something else that you're going to need to check is what kind of incoming supply do you have? Now here we have a single phase 100 amp breaker. So that's more than enough to run our solar and battery system and have our heat pump. Now, some older houses, you might have an 80 or a 60 amp breaker, and depending on what you're connecting to it, whether you have electric cars or not, you might need to think about, do I need to get this upgraded? If you need to get it upgraded, then you're going to need to talk to your DNO, and that is possibly going to take months. So you need to think about this in advance. One other situation you might need to check on is whether or not you have a direct supply. So I have 100 amp coming in just to me, or if it is a looped supply. Does your power come in and then loop out and go to a neighbour? If you do have a looped supply, please do contact your DNO. There will be changes that need to happen. They might need to unloop you from your neighbour. That is going to require probably a few months for them to be able to organise that, and is going to require work to be able to run new cables into your house. So as you can see there, our cables come down nice and neat in a nice straight line, all nicely clipped to the wall from the attic space. They then run round and up into this small consumer unit here. Now this is where you're going to isolate the heat pump if there are any issues. So in here we have obviously a main switch, we have our air source heat pump supply, we have our booster heater, which is the connection to the immersion heater. So if you need to boost the temperature of your water tank beyond about 55 degrees, then that's what we use there. And then we have a single breaker that's running both our Shelly monitor and our D2 pump. The D2 pump is the emergency pump that lets you evacuate the pressurized cylinder. This is only used if there's a fault and you need to empty the tank. And then next to it is the only non-standard part of the install, which is our Shelly energy monitor, which I've talked about in lots of other videos. This allows me to accurately measure how much energy this device is using. So why is all of this important? Your electrician is going to do a great job. I'm absolutely sure of that. But your electrician doesn't have an understanding of what you may want to do in the future. For example, installing that Shelly energy monitor. When they installed this, I deliberately asked them to leave some extra space in this box so that I could install the Shelly energy monitor later. It's also worth thinking about cable runs. Not everybody likes this idea of having everything running up the outside of their house. Me personally, I prefer it. I have cables going up and around the house on the outside, because at some point in the future, if I need to change them, I need to upgrade them, or I need to replace them, it's really easy if they're easily accessible and we don't have to start pulling up floorboards. But you might be different. If you want to route the cables somewhere else, you want them to go in and under the floors, then make sure that you figure that out in advance and talk to your surveyor and your electrician before they start the work. Now, let's talk about tariffs, because these things can use quite a bit of electricity. For anybody who watched my video about how much energy this used over January when it got really cold, you'll know that on some days it was using nearly 40 kilowatt hours of power. Now, that's not normal. On average days, you might be somewhere around about 12 kilowatt hours, maybe up to about 20. But if you're having a larger heat pump installed, this is a 6 kilowatt unit, maybe you're having an 8 or 10 or even a 12 kilowatt unit, then you're going to be using a lot more electricity. Now, obviously that's going to be offset because you're not going to be using as much gas from your boiler, but you want to make sure that you're on the right tariff. Now, depending on who your energy provider is, and I'm going to talk specifically about the Octopus tariffs because they're the ones I'm more familiar with, but check with your provider if they have a heat pump specific tariff, or if you own an EV, do they have an EV tariff that you can get on that will give you access to cheaper rate energy. Now, if you're not an Octopus customer and you are thinking about transferring across to Octopus, then I'm going to put a link on the screen. That is my referral code. If you would use that referral code, you will get £50 off of your first bill. I will also receive £50, which I'm going to donate to charity. Now let's talk about the Octopus tariffs that are available. So we'll start with Octopus Cozy. Octopus Cozy is a heat pump specific tariff. You can only get access to this tariff if you're an Octopus customer and you have a heat pump. Octopus Cozy gives you 3 periods a day of low cost energy. And this is ideal if you don't have solar and batteries and you want to heat your house in bursts. So when the energy is cheap, you ramp the heat pump up, you use quite a lot of energy, but you heat your house up and then you let it cool down slowly until the next cheap period when you heat it up again. Now, personally, we don't do that. We keep the house at a constant steady temperature throughout the whole day. It is slightly more economical, but it is only slightly more economical because we have access to an EV tariff and we also have battery storage. Now, if you have an EV, you've probably got either Octopus Intelligent Go or Octopus Go, which means you've got between 5 and 6 hours in the early hours of the morning of cheap rate electricity, which means you can drive your heat pump really hard during the night, heat the whole house up, and then let it cool down. Now, this is an ideal tariff if you're out most of the day, if there's nobody in the house, where you don't need to keep the house at a constant temperature. And then you just need to top it up a little bit in the evening. If you have battery storage, it's even better because you can fill your batteries during that cheap period when you're also charging your EV, and then you can run your heat pump during the day or for a portion of the day from that cheap rate electricity. And that will bring your average price per kilowatt hour down. Now, ultimately, which tariff you use is up to you, but I'd highly recommend dusting off the spreadsheet, looking at your energy bills, figuring out how much power you use, and working out which tariff is going to be best for you. Now, for those of you that are not spreadsheet experts, I'd highly recommend a channel called Tim and Kat's Green Walk. Tim has done some excellent work modeling all of the tariffs, and I'll place a link in the description below to one of his videos where he shows you how you can calculate all of this for yourself. Now, as part of your installation, you're probably going to need to replace some or all of your existing radiators. As you can see here, our front room radiator has been replaced with a large 3-vane radiator. Now, it was important to us to make sure that it fitted into the existing space underneath the window, but to be able to get the heat energy that we needed, it required a much deeper radiator. Originally here, we had a single pane radiator. We've now gone to a triple pane radiator. Here in the hallway, we already had an existing double pane radiator, but as you can see, although we've still stayed with a double pane radiator, we've actually gone to a much taller model. This allows us again to get the heat energy required to heat the house and make sure that every room stayed consistently warm. Now, one thing you will notice is that the copper piping is all left bare. Now, it's up to you. Some people will paint this to match the wall. Personally, I've been told before, don't paint it, because if you do need to make any changes to it, it can be a pain to get the paint off if you need to get in and redo any of the joints. They will also fit these TRV valves to every single radiator. You do not need them, and in fact the recommendation from my plumber was to leave these fully open. Otherwise, what you're doing is putting stress on the heat pump to try and force more heat energy into the radiator by closing these down. They're really not needed, but as part of the MCS requirements, they have to be fitted to every single new radiator. Now, one of the things you can do to cover up the copper piping there is on Amazon, in B&Q and places, you can get these kits that allow you to put basically plastic white sleeving over the pipes to make it look a little nicer. And in fact, we'll head upstairs now and I'll show you one that I've already done in my bathroom. So as you can see here, rather than have the copper piping coming directly out the radiator, we've got a little piece of plastic sleeving that goes over it and a little plastic piece there that covers the holes in the wall, or in this case in the tile, just to make things look a little nicer. Now, one of the other things you need to consider is when they remove your gas boiler, what happens to the old boiler flue? Now, in my case, we had quite a large boiler flue. You can see by the new bricks there, the size that the hole in the wall that was left behind. So it really wasn't a simple case of just bung in some expanding builder's foam and block the hole up. In this case, they did actually come along. There's 2 rows of bricks in there. It is sealed in nice and neatly. Now, I'm sure the builders out there are saying, well, why didn't they tie in the bricks properly? Well, 2 reasons. One is that the bricks don't actually match. The bricks for the house just weren't available, the same type of bricks, so these were the nearest match we could get. And later on next year when we remodel the kitchen, our plan is to put a door here anyway. So that was a perfectly good fix as far as we were concerned. Now, if you've got a small flue, a hole, I have seen a number of installations where they've basically squirted some expanding foam into it and put a fake cover on the outside wall. Personally, I think that's a pretty poor way to seal it up. So please do check with your installer exactly what their plans are, what they're going to do with the existing flue. Now, another thing to consider is, where is your thermostat going to go? Most installations, I would imagine, are probably going to be a single zone for the whole house. And the default location that they generally want to put these is where your existing thermostat is. In most UK houses, certainly in most modern build houses, the thermostat seems to be in the hallway close to the front door. Generally, this is one of the colder parts of the house because the door gets opened and closed quite a lot. So this thermostat here will obviously read the temperature in this part of the house, and it means that the rest of the house might be slightly warmer. Really, the best place for this is in the room that you're going to be inhabiting most of the time. So in your front room or your dining room or wherever it is that you as a family live. Don't just assume that because you had a thermostat there before, that's where it's got to go. Talk to your installer, find the ideal location for your thermostat. So one last thing to consider is your installation is going to take anywhere from 4 to 5 days, most likely. At that time, you're going to have plumbers and electricians and maybe other workmen all on site. So think ahead, where are they going to park? You may need to find parking for 3 to 4 vans outside close to your house, because they're going to need to be able to get access to those vans. Now, we're in a fortunate position, we've got a large number of private parking spaces at the front of our house. But maybe if you're on a street, if you don't have your own parking, maybe consider it, talk to your neighbours, figure out where everybody's going to park, because you really don't want to be upsetting your neighbours whilst you're having your heat pump installed. That's it for this video. I hope you found this video and this entire series useful. If you are considering getting a heat pump, these are just a few of the things that, having had the heat pump installed and lived with it for a little while, that I've learned that might make your journey just that little bit easier. I hope you found this useful. Apologies for this one being a long video. This is what happens when you try and condense 5 videos all into one. But with that, we're going to head off out for a walk, and I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all soon for another video. Take care. Bye-bye.